want to say thank you to my mom for starting this journey and sharing the beginning of our journey. And I also just want to say thank you to all of you. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for your time listening to us share our journey. Sharing and talking about things is a really important part of healing. So thank you for your time today. I will start with the question, what has living with IPF been like? I say this like I am the one who has been diagnosed, which I am not, but rather it feels as though this diagnosis has impacted my life just the same. As a caregiver, we are so closely tied to this disease, to the pains, to the struggles, to the grief, to the difficulties, to the medical appointments, to the follow-ups, the questions, the decisions. I am here today to share with you some things that I have learned about what it means to be a caregiver, the different stages and aspects, what I have learned through this journey over the past 19 months. A recent internet search list tells me that one of the things a good caregiver must do is take care of themselves. When my dad was first diagnosed, he and my mom came by late one evening and they stood on the driveway and they told me the news, that his lungs were failing and they didn't know how much healthy time he was going to have left on this earth. I remember my heart shattered at that moment. I remember excusing myself to the basement bedroom, closing the door, sitting on the floor, hugging my knees to my chest and rocking back and forth. The sounds coming from my mouth were those of someone who had experienced an incredible loss. I kept saying over and over again, my dad? But my dad's so strong. This can't be true. Not my dad. My dad is my hero, my rock. He's the pillar to our big and crazy family. He has such an important role still in our community. My dad's only 61. How is this possible? I knew one day I would be facing this, but never in a million years would I think it would come so soon. I remember arguing with my sister in the weeks following this news. I was crying all of the time and truly felt so much loss. My sister was upset with me because she felt like I was grieving for someone who had already passed, even though my dad was still very much alive. She kept saying to me, where was my hope? And that was so hard to hear. The reason I share this part of my journey with you is because for me, to be a good caregiver, I needed to take care of myself first. I needed to deal with my own emotions. I needed to heal my heart so that I could make room for someone else. There has always been space for my father in my heart. He's one of my most treasured people. But there needed to be space to be a caregiver for my father, and that required a different piece of my heart. To be a caregiver, I needed to make room and space for compassion, for empathy, for selflessness. I love my dad so much, and nothing can take that love from me. He is my parent and has cared for me my whole life, but now I also needed to approach my dad from a different lens, as it was now my turn to care for him. And this is not something that happens instantly, that caregiver-patient, family member relationship. This is something that evolves over time as both parties learn how to navigate a delicate situation with so many interfering complexities. That first year of my dad's diagnosis was very difficult. There was a huge sense of grief and confusion surrounding the first 6 months. Everyone was worried. No one quite knew what to say. We didn't want to sound negative or anxious. We didn't know what questions to ask, and we didn't have a lot of answers. In those first few months, there was just so much change. My dad had to leave his job of 40 years, he was so passionate about his job, and he wasn't ready to retire yet. He left almost instantly so he could go on disability to help pay for these new medications. And then he started having appointments, which seemed almost daily. He started new medications that only seemed to make things incredibly difficult for him, and it appeared that his prognosis was rapidly declining. Was this the diagnosis? Was this the meds? Is this how it's going to be from now on? Is the end nearer than we thought? Those days were so hard. Watching a man you grew up admiring for their strength be broken down by this illness, complication after complication from trying new medications, sickness after sickness, coughing, so much coughing, and when he wasn't doing that, sleeping, always falling asleep. Like what you would expect from a 90-year-old man, sleeping sitting at the dinner table, sleeping sitting on the couch, sleeping mid-conversation. These were incredibly hard days to witness, and it just added to my own grief. But I've learned as a caregiver, despite your own emotions, you show up. As hard as it was, I had to show up. I had to be there and try to instill some normalcy. When he was awake, I would ask my dad questions about life, about what he was going through, so that he knew he had a safe place to talk about those things. But I would also talk to him about other things. I would ask him for advice on car shopping, or fixing things around the house, about which appliance was better rated in consumer reports, or which direction to take my career in, about parenting advice. My dad, having his life just been completely upheaved, and was probably feeling a huge loss in the things he was no longer able to do at that time, he needed to know that he was still valuable, that his words and his conversations mattered more than anything. My dad went from someone who appeared generally healthy, albeit a terrible cough that he seemed to have contracted over recent years, which we all thought was a result of COVID. He used to work 14-hour days, pick up the grandkids from school, go to all of their soccer games, spend his weekends fixing anything and everything at his own house, and then go to his children's house, his very grown-up, needy children, to see what he could fix there. He would visit with people or stay up late writing sermons or researching new technologies to implement into his teachings. To paint a clear picture, he was a very hard worker. And then suddenly that was stripped away almost instantly, and he seemed confined to his chair in the living room, always so tired. So I learned very quickly that I needed to have even more empathy and compassion in these moments than ever. What would such a shock be like for a man who was used to being so busy, so involved, so needed? The mental health aspects of this are heartbreaking. I needed compassion in my heart first for his physical ailments, but also and equally as important, I needed compassion for the ailments that he couldn't see. As a caregiver, it is important to keep in mind both the physical and mental and spiritual aspects of the body. I recognize that my dad needs more time to rest now, that he needs assistance to run up the stairs and grab something for him, or move a piece of furniture out of the garage, or to put his new electric bike onto the back of the camper. But also, he needs to feel a sense of purpose, so I bring him questions that he can research for me from the comfort of his chair, or small jobs like picking up the kids from school and making them eggs and toast for dinner. We also, for his retirement, our family got together and purchased him what was called Storybook. And Storyworth is a subscription where they get to write down answers to questions, and it turns into a book that we can cherish forever. And these small things are really important in the bigger picture of helping someone feel needed, because he is so much. I think it was a year into the diagnosis when things started to feel different. There seemed to be a shift. He was now on a different medication, and it seemed to be going better for him. For what seemed like so long, my parents had never strayed far from the house, as they were always wondering about what was going to happen next. Was he going to get a transplant? If so, they needed to be close. It almost felt like they couldn't move forward until they knew these answers. Finally, my dad had appointments to pre-assess whether he would be a good candidate. It was at this time they discovered his heart had been working overtime since it was no longer getting the oxygen it needed, and he started another medication to help his heart. And that seemed to give him just the slightest bit more energy, but it did make a big difference in his daily tasks. There was not just a shift in the physical, but also in his mental journey as well. I think he allowed what was happening to sink in, to process it, to grieve it, to heal with it. I think we all did by this point, and I'm a strong believer that time is a true gift. For with this gift of time, the season for shock and uncertainty, the season to grieve and process, came the season to modify and move forward. I remember in that first year, him suddenly saying things like, I can't ride a bike anymore because I get too out of breath. Or I don't know if I will ever get to golf again because I don't want to exasperate my breath. He was overwhelmed thinking about all the things he could no longer do. At first, it was easy to see how grief could become all-consuming when thinking about those things that he loved, that now could potentially cause an exasperation, or could worsen his condition or send him to the hospital. He was scared. But then I started to notice small changes after that first year, changes in the way he modified his existing lifestyle to bring more joy. There was so much sadness and confusion that first year. This new year was going to be a gift of time to add in more joy. My dad started walking consistently, and he loved to show off the new gadgets to test his oxygen level and heart rate. The grandkids especially loved joining him on these walks, mostly so that they could try out the finger oxygen reader thing. It made them feel close to him. They got to be like Grandpa when they put that on. They loved when he read the number to them and he told them how healthy their lungs were. Many of us joined him for walks, and it became our new routine, one that I will always cherish. I enjoyed going for walks with my dad, and although admittedly I had to slow my own pace down, I was so grateful to take time to do these things, because how often are we given time? My dad then purchased himself and my mom electric bikes so that they could still go on bike rides. These fancy new bikes, which allowed them to keep up with the grandkids and go for scenic bike rides, was a turning point. He no longer was looking at the things he could not do, but instead finding modified ways to do them. I have been a teacher for 17 years, and I have worked with many, many students who feel like they just can't do it. I see their frustration when a task seems challenging or impossible, but I meet them at their level and I say to them, did you know that there is always more than one way to do each and every task? And then we work together to find ways to modify that task so that the students are still able to feel that sense of achievement. One way my parents modified their journey to bring more joy was with travel. My parents loved to travel in the past, to go to Mexico with their friends, but after the diagnosis, things felt so unsure. How was his health? Would his insurance cover an emergency? What would flying be like? What if he had an exasperation? Would he get on the transplant list? How long did that take? My parents never wanted to be too far from the comforts of home, just in case. So instead they modified. They decided to sell a vehicle and purchase a camper. They were still able to travel, but now in a modified way. And like my mom said, this past May, we joined our parents on a little family road trip to South Dakota. And it was amazing. My parents had done this road trip many years before, and it was so nice to hear the pep back in my dad's voice when he was telling us all the neat things we were going to see. He became our eager tour guide. There was a lot of joy. It felt less like a huge cloud of IPF hanging over us, and more like a new beginning, a modified way of life that was still enjoyable, memorable, and impactful. And I think modified is a key word in all of this. He used a camper to modify his travel. He had a safe and comforting place to go when he needed to cough at night. When doing the tourist attractions, he would drop us off and then found a bench to rest on. When hiking, he came with us with his oxygen bag strapped to his back. He knew his limits and made those clear. As a caregiver, I learned to respect those limits. I cannot pretend to understand what it must feel like to have limited oxygen. In fact, the thought of not being able to breathe scares me. Sometimes it seems like my same old dad who has a zest for life, that I forget we cannot see what lies underneath. And respecting his time of rest became an important part of being a caregiver. But this role is also twofold, and I think that would be the next stage in my journey. I was recognizing my role as a caregiver and all that it would require of me, but my dad needed to allow me to be a caregiver for him. And that was hard for a stubborn perfectionist who always did everything for himself and for others. It was real hard for him to appear weak and to give up control. And once again, I am so thankful for time, because it was time that was needed to build this trust and tear down those barriers. On one of our hikes, I remember helping him down an elevated section of the hiking trail. I could see that he was frustrated at first, that he couldn't do it because his muscles no longer carried the strength that they did when his oxygen was able to support them. I remember seeing that look of defeat in his face when he realized the only or best way down was relying on his daughter for help. I remember this moment because at the time it felt so odd to me. As his little girl, he would always have been the one to help me up. But there was something so circular about that role reversal, like this is how it should be for every parent-child. I will always remember how my dad's eyes softened in that moment when he realized that this was helping me also. To help another is one of the greatest satisfactions one can have. He allowed himself to trust that I was caring for him, not judging him or seeing his weakness, but instead offering a hand because it was needed. There was another time when we decided to go for a more strenuous bike ride with my dad, and we had planned for all the modifications. My dad had his oxygen bag on. He had an electric bike to help him push through the trail. I thought this was great, that we were still able to do our activities together, but in a modified way. But at one point, when crossing over a wooden bridge that wasn't completely flat, his bike hit a bump, tipped, and he sort of fell off. I don't think I'd ever seen my dad fall before, so it was a shock. His oxygen fell out of his nose and his heart rate became elevated, and then his watch started beeping to alert 911. It was just a small fall, no scratches even, but I rushed over to him and he sort of shooed me away. I think his pride was hurt, and I think he might feel that a lot these days when it becomes so obvious that he can no longer do the things that he did the same way. But I helped him up. We put his oxygen back on into his nose, turned off his watch alarm, and off we continued. We laughed afterwards about his watch trying to alert 911 for his bike tipping over. But this is the new norm. Things like bike rides are now just a little bit more complicated than before, but it's good to have someone to laugh with, to trust. So it has been a year and a half since IPF became a common word in my family. I don't think there is a day that goes by that this diagnosis isn't present in some way, but I am so very, very grateful for the time we have had as a family, for the time my dad had to figure things out and adjust, for the time for me to take care of my own emotions so that I can make space for more compassion and empathy, for the time for grieving about what needs to be grieved and then finding new ways to move forward, modify, and instill more joy, for the time for me to figure out what it means to be a caregiver, and the time to build that relationship of trust. I now take each day as a gift of time as I continue to grow in this role, as we both do. It is my prayer that through this conference, the stories and testimonies you might hear, the conversations you might have with others who are in the same journey, from the advice and knowledge you receive from the medical professionals who dedicate their practice to this disease, it is my prayer that you will feel supported, not alone, that you will know that the struggles you might face or the worries you might have are the hardest parts of this diagnosis, and that being a caregiver will come with challenges as you figure it out. But remember that time allows for healing and growing, and I pray that God would grant you and your loved ones time to process and heal, time to make adjustments and modify, time to grow in your roles as patient and caregiver, and most importantly, time to find joy. Joy in the little things like conversations about the best new coffee machine, or slower paced walks where you cherish the company, or going for modified motorized bike rides, or simply joy in letting go and taking a hand because it is there to help you when you need it. Time to trust, time to love, time to care. Thank you.